The U.S. men's national team will be heading to the 2022 World Cup in Qatar with one of its deepest and most talented squads ever. But there is a big issue with this squad that has a lot of people concerned, and that's youth and inexperience. And with that youth and inexperience comes a lot of head scratching surrounding the omission to one of the few players in the pool that actually does have World Cup experience, and that is defender John Brooks. Coming into World Cup qualifying, John Brooks was expected to take a massive role as one of the leaders of this squad and to just be a rock in defense throughout World Cup qualifying. That proved not to be the case. John Brooks took part in the first window of World Cup qualifying, and that was it. John Brooks' departure from the national team has had a lot of folks wondering what in the world is going on here. Today we're going to take a deep dive into the John Brooks situation and kind of see if we can figure out what are these form issues that Gregg Berhalter is referring to, how does John Brooks fit into this national team, and is he going to be a part of this team going forward? All that and more on this episode of the Yank Report. What's up? My name is Sam. This is the Yank Report, the show where we talk about the U.S. men's national team. If you're into that kind of thing, please hit the subscribe button. We do appreciate it. Now, before we leap headfirst into John Brooks, let's take a moment to hear a word from today's sponsor. Football might be over, but MLS is coming back, and Champions League and European soccer are in full swing. From all the latest odds, totals, player performance props, to where the next fired coach is going to land, BetOnline is the #1 spot for all your sports betting needs. Head over to the website or use your mobile device to sign up today and receive 50% off your welcome bonus on your first deposit. Just use promo code BELIEVE to get started. And it's not just basketball. BetOnline is your source for hockey, boxing, and UFC odds, right to the Olympic coverage, from sports right down to your favorite Vegas casino games. BetOnline is your #1 online wagering destination. BetOnline, the fastest and easiest way to wager on all your favorite sports and play all your favorite games. BetOnline, where the game starts. So let's start out with a little bit of background information on John. John Brooks is a German-American center back. He was born in Berlin, Germany. His dad was an American serviceman from Chicago, Illinois. John actually has a tattoo of Chicago and Berlin on both of his elbows. John made his international debut for the U.S. men's national team in 2013 in a game against Bosnia and Herzegovina. It's the game I always remember as a Josie Altidore hat trick game, but it was a big deal for the U.S. men's national team at the time because John Brooks was thought of as a player who could potentially be a world-class center back, one of the best players that America had ever had playing for them up to that point. So it was a huge deal. John later went on to play in the 2014 World Cup, which he is famously remembered for coming on as a substitute and scoring the game-winning goal in a 2-1 victory over Ghana. It was a header on a corner kick, and it was absolutely unbelievable. John later solidified himself as one of the best center backs in the history of the U.S. men's national team in the 2016 Copa America Centenario, a tournament that took place in the United States, where John was just an absolute beast, and he was later named to the FIFA team of the tournament. Now, what's John actually like as a player? Well, if you talk about John Brooks, you got to talk about his passing. He is, I think, the best passer in the U.S. men's national team pool. That's not just of the center backs, that's all players included. His long passing, particularly his long diagonals, are just absolutely unmatched within the U.S. men's national team player pool. And if you watch him for his club team, Wolfsburg, his top priority is pinging balls all over the field. We have no other player that can match his range of passing, especially from the center back position. And nowhere was John's passing ability more evident than in the semifinal of the Nations League whenever the U.S. faced Honduras. In the closing moments of that game, John pinged a pass over to Weston McKennie, who headed it back across to Jordan Pefok to win that game. It was a pass that, you know, the U.S. had been struggling for the entire game to just create any chances at all, and John found that moment, and it was his class that broke it open and allowed the U.S. to move on to the finals. That being said, John is not a perfect player, and he does have some weaknesses, and I think his weaknesses are his mobility and his defending in open spaces. He's not very good whenever he is isolated on a one-on-one, especially against faster players. In order to mitigate those weaknesses, John's club team Wolfsburg often deploys in a 3-man back line, and John is the left player in the 3-man back line. So if John is aggressive and loses a one-on-one battle upfield, he'll often have players behind him that can protect him for his lack of mobility and his inability to recover. With the U.S. men's national team, however, this is not always the case, and we saw this pretty early on. As far back as the game against Switzerland in the summer, the U.S. men's national team was getting exposed numerous times with their high back line. John Brooks was just getting passed by. This happened in that game. This happened in the game against Jamaica, and it was very concerning. It even happened in the Nations League game against Honduras. It was to the point that fans were kind of beating down the door of Gregg Berhalter, demanding better transition defense. Now, heading into the Gold Cup, a lot of those issues went away. If you remember in the Gold Cup, the U.S. won the Gold Cup based on their defense and on some stellar goalkeeping from Matt Turner. One of the standout players that emerged from the Gold Cup was Miles Robinson. Miles Robinson is a player with tremendous athletic ability, tremendous range, and tremendous defending one-on-one. When the U.S. backline did get stretched, it never seemed to be an issue because Miles Robinson had the ability to recover and shut down any attacks that might have developed. Whenever Miles Robinson was later paired with Walker Zimmerman, their combined athleticism and their dominance over the air really proved to be a shutdown defense for the U.S. men's national team. With Miles Robinson's player profile, his speed, his mobility, and the return of Tyler Adams, it really felt like a lot of the issues with John Brooks were going to get mitigated by the athleticism of those two players. Miles Robinson seemed like the perfect partner for John Brooks heading into World Cup qualifiers. But it didn't exactly play out that way. John's first start of World Cup qualifying came in the U.S.'s second game of the first window against Canada. And in this game, John had a pretty high-profile mistake that led to Canada's goal. It was a play where John got caught upfield, and his inability to recover in time really showed up. Now, this goal wasn't 100% on John Brooks, but you could see in this goal, in this sequence, that John's lack of mobility was going to be an issue there. In the very next game, the U.S. men's national team traveled to Honduras, and once again, John Brooks started. This time, it was in a three-man back line, and it was probably the worst coaching of Gregg Berhalter throughout all of World Cup qualifying. The U.S. looked terrible in that formation, and it was a terrible first half. But once again, there was a goal that was created, and once again, John Brooks got caught upfield, was unable to recover in time, and his man ended up scoring that goal. Once again, this goal is not 100% on John Brooks. There was other players and other blame to go around, but once again, we see John Brooks getting caught up and not being able to recover, and his lack of mobility and his defending in space are once again put on Front Street and result in a goal for the U.S. John Brooks would end up getting pulled at halftime in this game whenever the U.S. would switch back to their traditional 4-3-3, and the U.S. would eventually come back. But this game would end up being John Brooks' last game in World Cup qualifying. With John Brooks out of the picture, the center back pairing of Walker Zimmerman and Miles Robinson began to emerge as a pretty strong one for the U.S. men's national team. The pair featured some athleticism, some incredible aerial ability, and just a togetherness that allowed the U.S. to become one of the stronger defenses in all of CONCACAF throughout World Cup qualifying. Looking back at some of John Brooks' high-profile mistakes that ended up leading to goals against the U.S., and comparing the same way that Walker Zimmerman and Miles Robinson handled those same situations, it's pretty clear that Miles Robinson and Walker Zimmerman they fit better and they work better in that high-line, high-pressure defense that the U.S. men's national team has been playing under Gregg Berhalter. Now, I know that would lead a lot of people to say that isn't it the coach's job to fit the system around the players, to make the system work to get the best players involved? And I would say yes, but I would also say, considering the roster for the U.S. men's national team, considering the amount of players who thrive in a high-pace, high-transition, high-press game, it makes a lot of sense for the U.S. to tailor their system around these players, and that's going to leave some people out. There are other players in this pool who are better suited for, sitting back and possessing the ball and looking for long-range passes, who just don't seem to really fit as well in this particular system. That being said, John Brooks' experience and his passing ability would absolutely make him an asset for this national team, which has led a lot of people to wonder, is Gregg Berhalter ever going to call John Brooks back to the national team? When asked that very question, Gregg issued this statement. He said, "I hate to get detailed about this regarding an individual player, but whenever you look at the window in October, he had an injury. In November and January, we weren't happy with his club form. Now he's back playing, and now it becomes about what our game plan is for this window. And there's some details in his game that I talked to him that we need to improve to fit into our game model. And we don't have time on Tuesday to improve these things. The game's on Thursday, the game's on Sunday, there's not a runway here. So I think when this whole thing settles down, and hopefully we're in the World Cup, and we have the June window, the September window, I think there'll be an opportunity for him where we can really start addressing where we think his deficiencies are to be the starting center back in our pool. So clearly Gregg Berhalter hasn't completely closed the door on John Brooks. Now, to John Brooks' credit, he has issued some statements after not being called into the national team, and his last statement was really interesting to me. My plan is to fight as hard as I can to make it back to the USMNT. My American identity is at stake, an identity some have questioned over many years. We Americans have all been down and out at different times, but we always fight back, and I plan to do the same. Now, this statement was incredibly interesting to me. I don't know if you guys found it interesting. I found it incredibly interesting. Not the first part where, it sounded like anything any player that's, ever not been picked for a roster might have said. It was that last part. There should be no questions about my desire to play for this team. Why would he be saying that? Why would a player be stating that? We've seen other players who have made comment about not being called up. Luca De La Torre in a podcast, Joe Scally talking about not being contacted by the national team. It's unusual for me to hear there should be no questions about my desire to play for this team. And then he goes on to say, my American identity is at stake, an identity some have questioned over many years. This is fascinating stuff. It feels like there is a lot more to this story than what's actually going on the field, which has led a ton of people to speculate over whether or not this is a personal issue between Gregg Berhalter and the player, or between the player and the rest of the players in the locker room. And I think that second point is an interesting one, because throughout World Cup qualifying, all we've heard is about how tight-knit this group is and how much they care about each other. I mean, if you think about it, a lot of these players haven't been playing together on the national team all that long, but a lot of these players grew up playing together in youth teams. Whenever you think about how far back Tyler and Christian and Luca De La Torre and Weston McKennie were all on the same youth teams. And that same thing can be said for Tim Weah and Serginho Dest and Chris Richards. I mean, these guys came up playing with each other. They go back a long ways, and it's evident in the way that they talk about each other and the way they talk about how tight the group is within the national team. At least that's what they say to the media, and I really don't see any reason to doubt that. So the question becomes, how does John Brooks fit into that whole situation? Is he an issue in that locker room? We have no idea. There's no way we could know. The only thing that I point to, and I think is a really fascinating thing, is despite John Brooks being the World Cup veteran, despite him having 45 caps, despite him being the most tenured and having the most, I guess, professional career of any player currently in the national team pool, John Brooks has never been captain of the U.S. men's national team, not once. Despite the amount of roster turnover, despite all the new players, John Brooks has never served as captain of this national team. What does that mean? I have no idea, but I find it a really interesting tidbit. It's also worth noting that it's not as if John has never had issues with coaches throughout his career. There was a well-documented issue between John and one of his coaches over at Hertha Berlin whenever John was still a very young player. And just this season, there were a couple articles that came out in the German publication Bild that suggested John Brooks was a problem child over at Wolfsburg. Now, to be fair, Bild is a publication that many people in Germany feel isn't worth its weight. However, it's another piece of evidence in this, whatever we want to call it, case of John Brooks. So that's where we are today. We have a player that possesses a passing ability that is unmatched within this national team, a passing ability that would certainly help out on the field of this national team that struggles to move the ball from the back to the front. But we also have a defender that struggles to defend in open spaces and has a tendency to get caught upfield, and that's been exposed many times while playing for this national team. We also have other defenders that have stepped up in his absence and have proved to be very effective in the same system, where John is proved to be ineffective at times. What does this mean for John moving forward, and ultimately will he be a part of that roster in 2022? I'm uncertain at this point. I have a feeling that he will be called into the Nations League, as Gregg Berhalter said, this summer, and we'll have another opportunity to evaluate him there. But I don't see John Brooks getting faster anytime soon, and I'm not sure how you would play this defense any differently that would allow more cover for John Brooks, unless there's some type of formation change or something like that, something fundamental that would give more cover to John Brooks and not allow him to be caught upfield so often, allowing for these transition moments and for the U.S. to just be caught in one-on-ones with the keeper. All that being said, what's your take on this situation? Do you think John should have been called up throughout World Cup qualifying? Do you think he should be the starting center back for the national team right now? Or do you think it's best that the US leave him at home and look for more athletic center backs to fill his role on the national team? Let me know in the comment section. As always, si puede hablar español, dígame un comentario en español. If you want these videos in podcast form, you can check out the Yank Report podcast anywhere podcasts are found. Thank you guys so much to my tier 2 subscribers, Manuel Oliveras, Mike Irish, Chris Matassa, and Matthew Doyle. Thank you to my tier 3 subscriber, Matthew Hanna. Thank you guys so much for watching. My name is Sam, and this is the Yank Report brought to you by Bet Online.